Hello everybody, my name is Kai. Welcome back to Warframe. Today we'll be taking a look at Vault Prime specifically. I have a really fun and a very good Steel Path nuke build, mainly centering around the helmet ability for today and his fourth ability, Discharge. But enough talk, why don't we go hop into the sim so I can show you just how we achieved that. Here we are in the sim, and before we actually get to the build itself, I would just like to say and here we are in the simulacrum. Now, before I get to explaining his abilities like I do in all of these videos, I just want to say that while Vault is a starter frame, and Vault Prime is really easy to get due to him being back in the Prime Resurgence right now, this is not exactly a starter build. Now, this is a zero forma build, but the mods and stuff that are used here are not something that a new player is going to be able to do by any means, and we are also using the helmet to use Terrify. Speaking of that, why don't we actually start and go over these abilities so you can understand all of the synergies and how this build works. Terrified, like I just said, is the helmet ability on this build for a multitude of reasons. With the semi-recent changes to how armor strip abilities work in the entire game, they have become additive, not multiplicative, and also Terrify got a massive buff to a base 60% armor strip and only needing 167 strength to full strip. So yes, this is an armor stripping ability. So, a couple casts, you'll see that I strip armor. Now, one pretty unfortunate thing about this ability though is that it does have an enemy's affected cap. Right here in the description you can see that at base you can affect only 20 enemies with one cast, but that scales off of strength, negative, or positive. It is also a duration and range based ability. Its range is actually pretty generous, and its duration obviously can be modded by the ability duration stat. But it also does what it says it does, and actually terrifies enemies, so they will run away from you. Now, this is generally not seen as a very great thing when you're not using its augment, which provides you with an 80% slow most of the time when you terrify enemies. But that is negated by Discharge, our fourth ability, and I will get to that later. But again, Terrify, probably the best armor strip in the entire game in my opinion. It's very expensive, I will say that, 75 base energy. But that means that it is a great ability for shield gating. So you get a very wide radius, very easy because you don't need a lot of strength armor strip, and it is great for shield gating. All around, a great ability that really works well with Vault and Discharge. Moving on, we have Vault's second ability, Speed. Speed can be classified as a movement ability, I guess, but it also does a couple other things. So on cast, you will give yourself a movement speed bonus. Now this does scale off strength, and with really high strength values, this can actually be really useful to help you speed through levels, even if it's not as fast as other frames like Wukong, Gauss, and Titania. The other two things that this ability grants are reload speed and attack speed. So if I shoot my Arcoplasmor and reload, fairly long reload time. And now I am on a bit of a negative strength on this current Vault, but now if I reload, you can see that it is definitely faster, and my attack speed on this Quan now is absolutely ridiculous, as I have no attack speed mods on it. As you can see, besides Berserker Fury, which obviously needs kills to get that attack speed. And just to give a true demonstration, modding for max strength, Vault becomes very fast. And also attack speed becomes laughable, as in animations just kind of start to bug out. Yeah, I can't even this is me spamming my melee button compared to that. Vault's third ability is Electric Shield. Electric Shield is a relatively simple ability that is actually pretty good after its recent changes. When you cast it, you will create an electric shield, to no one's surprise. Now, other things about this is that you can have up to 6 at one time and kind of aim them in any direction. But besides the point, when shooting through this, you and your allies will also gain 200% critical multiplier, and 50% electrical damage. Those are unaffected by strength mods. I do not have any electricity on my Phantasma. As you can see, I was getting electricity procs there. Now, for some specifics, in case you want them, the critical multiplier is a sort of after weapon mods, means it just takes your modded crit damage and just doubles it, which is actually really good. Obviously, on something like the Phantasma, which is not a crit weapon, you won't really notice it that much, but it is still there for Eidolon hunts. The reason that this is so good for Eidolon hunts is because the Electric Shield is one of the only things in the game that can buff Operator amp damage. Showcasing again on this gunner, body shot hits for 148, no crit. If I come back into my frame, put an Electric Shield down, 222 and 2308 on a crit. Not bad. Obviously, I'm also getting electricity proc because, again, one of the only things in the game that can buff operators and their amps. Again, this damage is additive, so if, for example, my Phantasma did 100 damage shooting through it, it would now do 100 damage on top of 50 electricity damage. You actually can stack the shields too. This is why Vault is just such a great frame for Eidolons. If I put 3 of them down, I will now have a 150% electricity damage bonus, and will do way more damage than shooting this gunner. Obviously, getting those crits is kind of crucial, especially to Rock Black Prism. Vault can also pick up these shields, which is actually pretty nice. There used to be an energy drain on carrying this, and you are limited only to using secondaries, which is really dumb, but now there is not a drain, and you can use whatever. This just functions the same. It's obviously smaller now, but you can go around with it, and it doesn't take any, like, damage. So this is just kind of a barrier to damage, no matter where you're looking, which is actually really good. And finally, we come to Vault's 4th ability, Discharge. This one is actually a little complicated, I'll be honest with you. Discharge has a lot of stats, and what I mean by that is that there are a lot of things that this ability does. But the main thing you should know is that when you cast it, you will chain electricity between all targets in your immediate area. Now, originally, when you cast this, if there were no targets in this range and only 2, they would only chain off of each other. So, you get increased damage the more targets and the more range you have, as the chains can increase from more targets than just 1 or 2. Discharge and its electric arcs, as I'm going to call them most of the time, which are the little, like, Tesla arcs that shoot off of the enemies once they've already been stunned, are not affected by the environment, so they will sort of go through walls or whatever. But besides that, I think that there are some very important stats that are listed here that we should go over. The first one of those being the radius. This is just how far your ability will go, and it scales really nicely off range. The effect radius is how far the chains off of targets will go. So actually building at the current range I am of at 257, this has an effective range of around 70 meters if you hit targets that are at the end of that 51 meter radius at base. The duration and the effect duration stats are also possibly the most important ones here. The base duration of 4 seconds, which cannot be modified by the duration stat, is kind of when enemies walk into your area. Up to 4 seconds after casting, they will then be stunned. They do not need to be hit by it immediately. But the effect duration is really where this ability's damage comes from, because this ability ticks for damage every 0.5 seconds. So that means that if right now I'm hitting for 1,000 damage, and it's lasting 1 second, I will hit for a total of 2,000 damage, not counting targets chaining off of each other. This means that running low strength is actually not a big deal, because this ability and its damage is already fine enough that scaling it for duration so you get more procs is more important, which gives us 6.09 seconds, which is right above the 6 seconds. Honestly, it just works perfectly fine, and you are really able to get a lot out of this ability. But just remember that if you want to be able to damage with it, you need to have good duration. Strength is not that big of an issue. Obviously, we are building for a little bit of strength on this build because of Terrify, but besides that, just showcasing it one more time, proc the ability. All targets will chain off of themselves onto every nearby enemy, and that effective radius does scale off of range, so, you know, the more range you have, the more damage you get, the more duration you have, the more damage you get. Which means strength is, like I said, not as important. But those are his abilities. Why don't we move on to the actual build? Starting off with our Arcanes, we are using Energize and Multi-Augmented. Energize is because this is a fairly energy-hungry build. Multi-Augmented is here because we do need to build up to a total of 167 strength to full strip with Terrify. Now, at the beginning of any mission, you're not going to have built up that extra 60%. And 60% plus the 95 does not equal 167. So we are using Growing Power in our Aura slot. This gives us another 25. But if we combine the 25 given here, which makes us sit at 120, and also come to the Materai tree with the Sling Strength buff, after switching to your Warframe, after a chained sling, you gain 40% strength. That'll put us at 160 strength. Obviously not enough to full strip with Terrify, but it is more than nothing, and means that you do not need to build up the full multi-augmented stacks to be able to get that full strip. You get a couple kills, 50 or so, and then you Materai Sling Strength and Growing Power, and you're set. We are using an Archon mod on this build. Archon Stretch gives the exact same bonuses as normal Stretch, but in this case, it states that electricity damage restores +2 energy a second over 5 seconds, which is 10 energy over 5 seconds. This is just because we're dealing electricity damage with Discharge. So, free energy is free energy. It's not that much, but it'll continuously reproc itself because, again, this chains off of enemies. we are building for really high range here. My Archon stretch is not max rank. You can easily get away with just using normal stretch. I like to use this because it is literally that, but just better. But again, building for range through overextended, reach, and stretch. This does give us a negative on our strength, but again, range is damage. Fleeting expertise is here, down ranked 1, so that we have 50% ability efficiency and minus duration. Like I said, duration is damage on this build alongside range. If we were to go down another 10 duration, we would go under the 6 seconds, which would then make us lose a damage tick. Augur message is there to bring us back up from the previous value, alongside prime continuity, because we are using transient fortitude, which does remove some of our duration alongside fleeting expertise. Rolling guard, status cleanse. This is kind of on most frames that don't have a way to get rid of status effects, since they will kill you at those higher levels. Augur reach is here too. Now we are using 2 augur mods on this build here, and 2 augur mods on our pistol. Specifically on my epitaph, I'm using Seeker and Pact. This is because with a Decaying Dragon Key equipped, you have 113 shields. And unfortunately, at 150 efficiency, which I think is necessary for this build because it is very spammy, you cannot shield gate in a full cast of any of these abilities. But that is not a big deal because of the damage rotation that this kind of setup really needs. Like I said before, Terrify causes enemies to run away, but Discharge stun locks enemies for 4 seconds and makes them chain and will pretty much kill them all the time. So this means that you are only casting Terrify if you are about to cast Discharge, which means that you don't need to use Creeping Terrify for the slow, and also that you will be casting both of the abilities back to back, which is more than enough to recharge your shield gate. Showing you the actual damage rotation, just going to use Terrify to strip all these enemies. 3 times should be enough to get it off all of them. Actually, I do not need the energy. And now, when I cast this, it kills very effectively. But you will notice that as the enemies start to die out, there are some that survive. And this is because as there are less enemies, there are less chains. And less chains of electricity means less chains of damage. Now, if you want to use Brief Respite in your aura, so you do not have to run all these augur mods, which means you would be able to replace these for different mods, you can do that. But what I also really like about this build is that this is a no forma build. You can throw this on your Vault Prime, and it'll work immediately. This will not work on base Vault, but I think that if you're doing Steel Path content and such and want to invest in a frame, you have their Prime, and Vault Prime is really, really easy to get right now through Prime Resurgence, so definitely go pick him up. But with that being the build, if I go over its damage rotation one more time, and yes, this is an expensive damage rotation, you need to be getting a lot of kills. You armor strip all the enemies. That should be everybody, and then you just cast Discharge. You chain through and you kill everyone pretty damn well. To bolster this though, I have 2 methods to increase it a lot. Terrify is an armor strip, which means that enemies have only health. Viral, as a status effect, increases damage on health taken by up to 325%. If we are to prime enemies with the viral status effect using our epitaph and then use Discharge on them, it will kill significantly faster. Another way that we can get this really, really easily is using a Panzerwelpe, since this, with the Viral Quills mod, spreads the viral status effect just like Saren, which is really damn good. And it also should be known that the first and only 1 proc of Viral at base gives you 100% more damage. So you don't even really need to have every enemy at 10 stacks. But if I do come and demonstrate, just armor stripping all these enemies real quick, and then priming them, and using Discharge, the damage is significantly higher, with only 1 enemy surviving because literally everyone else died too quickly for this one to not die. And that is the Vault build, everybody. Now, again, I do recommend the usage of Madurai for its Sling Strength buff, purely for when you first get into the mission and want to be able to single cast your Terrify and get those full armor strips. Also, more strength means more enemies affected by Terrify, so you might even want to use this in general, because it also provides you with Power Transfer, which gives you casting speed, which is something that Terrify and Discharge really like, as they are long casts for abilities. So going into your Operator every 20 or 30 seconds or so, and getting yourself that extra strength and casting speed will make this build feel a lot better. But I think you guys want to see this build in the Steel Path. So let's go do that, why don't we? Here we are in Taivuni on the Kuva Fortress. I actually like to test things here a little bit more lately because the Corpus are a little annoying in their corrupted form because they have those really high shield values, and for armor ship abilities like this, it doesn't really do much. But besides that, Phantasma, using it because it's a great weapon. Epitaph is here, obviously for that viral priming, even though it's not really necessary against lower level enemies, and I would recommend you use a Glaive Prime. But this discharge build can actually kill Acolytes really well, since the electricity status effect that it gives is not technically counted as electricity, but more so the chaining effect. So it actually kills Acolytes pretty damn well if you have big crowds. This build is pretty energy hungry, as you will come to see. So you just need to keep the high kills up, and then you won't really have many issues, but I can see how that could be troubling for some people. Obviously you need to double cast at the very start. And once you, you know what? That worked pretty damn well, did it not? And the chain range is ridiculous. And obviously discharge plus terrify is more than enough to kill all these enemies if I, just decide to throw out my epitaph. Finding. Cast. Things die so fast that they honestly, like, that guy didn't die because the enemies died too quick. Also feel free to cast your shield, and actually, because it just blocks bullets, which is pretty damn nice. But the main usage is good with this incredible. And I will admit that having a max rank Arcane Energize will actually make this build feel a lot more comfortable to use because, energy. This is a spam cast build. It kind of needs it. And you can definitely make it work without. I mean, look at that chain range. Something that actually really should be noted, though, is that this is a it requires enemies, is what I'll say. Not a lot of enemies means not a lot of chaining, which means not a lot of damage. It can actually be pretty detrimental to your cast. Like right now, I cast all this stuff and get it going. Like it'll kill these enemies, but these ones over here that weren't affected by the original Terrify cast are kind of alright. You need those big groups of enemies. There's another reason why I like doing step path here, because you can find those, but right now, my luck just kind of seems to be a little better. See, the damage is kind of lackluster when there's not enough enemies to chain off, which is unfortunate. Because big crowds are what this one needs. I've had enough multi-mental stacks now that I don't need to cast my Matter-Icing Strength for it, but if I do, I get more strength, which is never something to complain about, and more target protection, which obviously helps. Honestly, you'll find that running this build when you've got max energy stacks and not having to double cast Terrify is actually pretty useful. Alright, that's gonna be it for this video, everybody. This Vault, sort of Steel Path type nuke thing is actually, one of my favorite sort of nuke combinations in the game. It's just fun, and, you cannot deny that seeing all those numbers flying around everywhere is not very, very satisfying. But besides all that, thank you so much for watching. Channel, we hit 2.5k on the road to 3, which is more so on the way to 10. I think we're going to hit it this year, definitely within the next couple months, and I'm really excited. So thank you guys for all the support. I really appreciate all of you.